I never thought my life would come to this. When you give someone 32 years of loyalty, of unwavering faith, you begin to believe that nothing can shake the foundation you've built together. I believed in my marriage with all my heart. From the day I walked down the aisle in my white dress, trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement, to the nights I spent waiting for him to come home after long shifts, I carried the weight of that promise, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. But death didn't part us. Words did. A single sentence, spoken in front of the people I loved most, became the knife that cut through everything we had built. I still hear it echoing in my ears like a cruel whisper that refuses to fade. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the memories come flooding back, I think, how could 32 years dissolve into nothing so quickly? I was 19 when I first met him. I was young, naive, and hungry for love. He was older, confident, and charming in a way that made me feel safe. At that time, I believed love was supposed to be overwhelming, the kind that sweeps you off your feet and makes you forget the rest of the world. He gave me that feeling, at least at the start. We laughed easily, shared dreams about the future, and spent long evenings talking about the kind of family we wanted. I thought I had found my forever. In those early years, life wasn't easy. We didn't have much money. We lived in a small rented apartment with leaky pipes and noisy neighbors. But I didn't care. We had each other. When I cooked meals with whatever little we could afford, he would pull me close, kiss my forehead, and say, "One day, we'll look back and laugh at this." That hope kept me going. Eventually, we saved enough to buy a modest home. It wasn't big, but it was ours. I painted the walls myself, planting flowers by the doorway because I wanted it to feel warm and alive. He worked hard, long hours, and I admired him for that. Every paycheck he brought home was proof, I thought, of his dedication to us. I was proud to be his wife, proud to stand beside him as we built our lives brick by brick. Then came the children. Our son was born first, and I thought my heart might burst from the love I felt holding him. A year later, our daughter arrived, and I finally understood what it meant when people said children complete a family. I threw myself into motherhood. Diaper changes at 3 a.m, endless laundry, cooking, cleaning. I did it all, and I did it with love. I believed it was my role, my calling. He was the provider, I was the nurturer. That balance, I thought, was what kept us strong. Looking back now, I realize how much of myself I poured into him, into them, into this marriage. I sacrificed dreams I didn't even dare to voice. When friends pursued careers, passions, and adventures, I stayed home, convincing myself that raising my family was enough. And it was, for a long time. Because when you believe in something, you give it your all. And I believed in us. There were hard moments, of course. Arguments over money, over parenting, over his long absences. Sometimes I felt invisible, like my efforts went unnoticed. But whenever doubt crept in, he had a way of pulling me back with small gestures, a surprise flower, a handwritten note, a whispered apology in the dark. I clung to those gestures like lifelines. They reminded me that despite the storms, love was still there. Years passed, and the children grew. Our son, bright and ambitious, became the center of our pride. He was the first to graduate from college, the first to carve out his own path. And when he told us he was getting married, my heart swelled with joy. I couldn't wait to see him build his own family, to pass down the lessons of love and loyalty that I thought had defined my own marriage. The wedding preparations became my obsession. I spent months helping with the arrangements, working late into the night to ensure everything was perfect. I wanted the day to be magical, not just for him but for everyone. It felt like a celebration not only of his love, but of the years we had survived together as a family. When I looked at my husband during those preparations, I felt a kind of gratitude. We had made it. 32 years of sacrifice and compromise had led us here, to this day of joy. The morning of the wedding, I remember staring at myself in the mirror. I wasn't young anymore. Lines etched my face, silver streaked my hair, and the sparkle in my eyes had dimmed from years of carrying responsibilities. But beneath it all, I still felt like that 19-year-old bride, hopeful and full of love. I wore my best dress, pinned my hair with delicate clips, and promised myself I wouldn't cry too much when I saw my son at the altar. The ceremony was beautiful. Friends and family gathered, laughter filled the air, and music floated through the hall like a blessing. My son looked so handsome, his bride radiant, and for a few hours I felt nothing but happiness. I looked at my husband and thought, we did this. Together. We raised him, loved him, and now we were letting him go into his own future. I squeezed my husband's hand, silently thanking him for standing beside me all these years. But that moment of gratitude didn't last. Because later, during the reception, everything I had built my life on came crashing down. One sentence, just one, changed everything. I didn't know it then, as I smiled and posed for photographs, but my world was about to shatter in the cruelest way possible. The reception was alive with joy. Glasses clinked, people danced, and laughter echoed against the walls. I remember watching my son and his new wife on the dance floor, their faces glowing with love and hope, and I thought to myself, this is what all the years were for. Every sacrifice, every tear, every sleepless night, it all led to this happiness. I floated from table to table, greeting guests, thanking them for being there. Everywhere I went, people complimented the food, the music, the decorations. You must be so proud, they kept saying, and I was. My heart felt light, almost too light, as though nothing could go wrong. At some point, my husband disappeared. I assumed he was greeting relatives or taking a break from the noise. He wasn't a man who enjoyed crowds. I didn't think much of it, not until I heard the tapping of a glass. The sound silenced the room, and all eyes turned toward him. He stood there, tall, confident, holding a microphone in his hand, and I smiled at first, expecting a toast. Maybe he wanted to congratulate our son, to speak words of wisdom as a father. That was the kind of man I thought he was, the kind who loved his family more than anything. But then, with the entire room waiting, he said the sentence that ended my marriage. I can't do this anymore. 4 words. 4 words that sliced through 32 years of loyalty. The room fell silent. At first, I thought I misheard him. Perhaps it was a joke, a clumsy attempt at humor. But his face told a different story. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold, and his voice steady. He wasn't joking. He meant every syllable. Gasps filled the room. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My son froze on the dance floor, confusion written all over his face. His bride clutched his arm, her smile fading into horror. And me. I stood there, rooted to the ground, unable to breathe. My chest tightened as though someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart until it cracked. I've stayed in this marriage out of duty, out of obligation, he continued, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. But I can't live a lie anymore. I want out. My knees nearly buckled. The world blurred, spinning around me as his words sank in. I searched for his eyes, desperate for some sign of regret, some flicker of softness that might tell me this was a mistake. But there was nothing. Only cold certainty. Whispers erupted among the guests. My family looked at me with pity, some with shock, others with judgment. The humiliation burned hotter than fire. 32 years of my life, exposed and discarded in front of everyone I knew. I wanted to scream, to beg him to stop, to remind him of the years we had shared, the children we had raised, the life we had built. But no words came out. My throat was dry, my voice lost. All I could do was stand there, trembling, while the man I thought was my partner dismantled my world with a few sentences. My son rushed forward. "Dad, what are you doing?" he demanded, his voice sharp with anger. "This is my wedding. This isn't the time or place." But my husband cut him off with a dismissive wave. "It doesn't matter when or where. The truth is the truth, and the truth is I'm done." My son's face twisted in rage. He turned to me, his eyes full of pain. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked softly, but I couldn't answer. My lips trembled, my mind blank. All I could do was shake my head. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. Not there. Not in front of everyone. I forced myself to stand tall, though inside I was crumbling. My entire identity, wife, partner, loyal companion, was slipping away, and I was powerless to stop it. Some guests tried to smooth things over. A cousin coughed awkwardly. Someone else tried to change the subject, but the damage was already done. The air in the room had shifted. The joy, the celebration, it was gone. In its place lingered a suffocating silence, heavy with betrayal and shame. I slipped out quietly, my feet moving on their own. I couldn't stay there, not another second. The whispers, the stares, the pity, it was too much. I found myself in the hallway outside the banquet hall, leaning against the wall for support. My hands shook uncontrollably as I tried to catch my breath. 32 years. Gone. I thought about the mornings I woke up early to pack his lunch, the nights I stayed up waiting for him to come home, the sacrifices I made so he could chase his dreams. I thought about the times I held him when he was sick, the birthdays I planned, the anniversaries I celebrated, even when he forgot. All those moments, all that love, reduced to nothing in a single public declaration. Why here? Why now? At our son's wedding, of all places? Was it cruelty? Cowardice? Or had he simply stopped caring so long ago that it no longer mattered? I felt the tears finally spill over, hot and relentless. My body shook with silent sobs as I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to hold myself together. For 32 years, I had been his wife. And now, in front of everyone, he had stripped me of that identity, leaving me exposed and broken. But even in that moment of devastation, a small voice inside me whispered, "You are more than this. You are more than his betrayal." I didn't believe it then, but that voice would become my lifeline in the days that followed. I don't know how long I stood in that hallway, my back against the wall, my breath ragged, my soul crushed. The sounds of the reception bled faintly through the closed doors. Music, laughter forced to resume, muffled voices pretending that nothing had happened. But I knew. Everyone knew. And the truth was, my life had just been torn in half. When the door opened and my daughter stepped out, I flinched. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She rushed toward me, wrapping her arms around me with the kind of fierce love only a daughter can give. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I don't know why he did this. I don't know how he could." Her words pierced me, both comforting and wounding. I stroked her hair, trying to stay strong for her. "It's not your fault," I murmured. "None of this is your fault." But inside I was screaming. Why me? Why now? Why like this? We sat together on a bench in the hallway. My body felt heavy, as if every bone had been replaced with stone. My daughter held my hand tightly, her tears wetting my sleeve. She was my child, but in that moment, she became my anchor. "Do you want me to talk to him?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger. I shook my head. "No. If that's how he feels, nothing you say will change it." And I realized, with a sickening clarity, that it was true. He had chosen his moment, cruel as it was, to tell the world he was done with me. That wasn't a mistake. That was finality. The rest of the evening blurred. I remember re-entering the hall eventually, forcing a smile for my son's sake. I didn't want his wedding to be completely overshadowed by my heartbreak. But the damage was done. The photographs from that night tell the story, me with a hollow smile, my eyes red-rimmed, standing beside a man who had already abandoned me in his heart. When the night ended, we went home separately. I couldn't bear to share a car with him. I rode with my daughter and her boyfriend, my body pressed against the cold window, staring out at the dark streets. My mind replayed his words over and over, "I can't do this anymore." Our house, once a place of comfort, felt foreign when I stepped inside. I looked at the photographs on the walls, our wedding picture, family vacations, birthdays, and it was as though they mocked me. Smiling faces frozen in time, hiding the truth I refused to see. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling, tears soaking my pillow. Every corner of the room whispered memories. The dresser where I had folded his clothes, the nightstand where he left his watch, the lamp we had picked out together at a flea market years ago. Now, each object was a reminder of a love that had rotted quietly, unnoticed until it collapsed completely. In the days that followed, my life became a storm. Relatives called, some out of concern, others out of curiosity. Friends sent messages filled with pity, the kind that makes you feel smaller instead of stronger. Everyone wanted to know the details, the reasons, the backstory. But I didn't have answers. How do you explain betrayal when you don't fully understand it yourself? He moved out within a week. No fight, no discussion. He packed a bag, avoided my eyes, and walked out the door. Just like that. 32 years of shared mornings, of arguments and reconciliations, of laughter and loss, gone with the slam of a door. The silence that followed was unbearable. At night, I would wander the house aimlessly, opening closets, running my hands over empty hangers, staring at the indentation his body had left on the mattress. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. But beneath the grief, anger began to stir. Anger at the cruelty of his timing, anger at the public humiliation, anger at myself for not seeing it coming. How long had he been planning this? How long had I been blind? I replayed our years together, searching for signs I might have missed. The late nights at work, the sudden disinterest in family gatherings, the way his touch grew colder, his words shorter. Were those warnings? Did I ignore them because I was too busy holding on to the fantasy that loyalty was enough? The truth was hard to face. I had built my identity around being his wife. And now, stripped of that role, I didn't know who I was anymore. One evening, while sorting through a drawer of old letters and keepsakes, I found a note he had written me on our 10th anniversary. It read, 10 years down, forever to go. I stared at those words until they blurred, my tears smearing the ink. Forever had turned out to be 22 years, shorter than promised. And yet, something shifted inside me that night. A small spark of defiance flickered to life. If he had chosen to erase me with a sentence, I would not erase myself. I still had my children. I still had my strength, though it was buried deep under layers of pain. And maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild. The journey ahead was terrifying. But I knew one thing with certainty. I would not let his betrayal be the end of my story. Healing is never a straight line. Some mornings, I woke up determined to move forward, to reclaim the pieces of myself I had lost. Other mornings, I couldn't even get out of bed. I'd pull the blankets over my head, drowning in memories, replaying every moment of my marriage like a movie I no longer wanted to watch. The house felt like a graveyard of broken promises. His chair at the dining table sat empty, yet I still caught myself setting a plate there out of habit. The closet held his lingering scent, faint traces of cologne mixed with laundry soap. I'd open it, breathe it in, and then collapse on the floor, sobbing. 32 years of loyalty doesn't just vanish overnight, it clings to you, haunts you. But life, as cruel as it can be, doesn't stop. Bills still needed paying. Groceries still had to be bought. The world outside kept turning, even when mine felt frozen in grief. I forced myself to go through the motions, to cook, to clean, to show up for my daughter when she came over to check on me. But inside, I was unraveling. My son avoided the subject at first. His wedding, the happiest day of his life, had been tainted by my husband's announcement. I didn't want to burden him further, so I pretended I was fine whenever he called. But mothers can't fool their children forever. One evening, he showed up at my door unannounced. "Mom," he said, pulling me into a hug, "you don't have to act strong for me. I know you're hurting." The tenderness in his voice broke me. I cried in his arms like a child, and he held me the way I had held him so many times before. "You'll get through this," he whispered. "You've always been the strongest person I know." His words planted another seed of hope in me. Maybe I could survive this. Maybe strength wasn't about never falling apart, but about finding the courage to piece yourself back together. Still, nights were the hardest. The silence in the house pressed down on me until I couldn't breathe. I'd wander into the kitchen, make tea I never drank, then sit by the window, staring at the dark street. That's when the doubts crept in. What if I'm unlovable? What if I wasted my best years on someone who never truly wanted me? What if this loneliness is all I have left? One night, unable to sleep, I pulled out an old photo album. Page after page showed the life we had built. Weddings, birthdays, vacations, little moments captured in time. And suddenly I felt angry. Angry that he had stolen not just my future, but also the meaning of my past. Were those smiles fake? Were those moments lies? The anger gave me energy. For the first time since the wedding, I got out of bed the next morning with a plan. I gathered everything that reminded me of him, clothes, letters, gifts, photographs, and put them in boxes. My hands shook, my heart raced, but I kept going. With every item I packed away, I felt lighter, as though the chains binding me were loosening. When I was done, I stood in the middle of the living room surrounded by boxes. 32 years reduced to cardboard and tape. And yet I didn't cry. I felt relief. He had chosen to erase me with a sentence, but now I was erasing him from my space. It was a small step, but it mattered. Around that time, I started writing in a journal. At first, it was just fragments, angry rants, tearful confessions, questions I didn't have answers to. But slowly, my writing became a lifeline. I poured out my pain onto those pages, and in return, I found clarity. I began to see patterns, truths I had ignored for years. Like how often I had silenced myself to keep the peace. How many times I had said yes when I wanted to say no. How I had shrunk myself to fit into the shape of the wife he wanted, losing pieces of my identity along the way. Realizing this hurt, but it also freed me. Because if I had lost myself once, maybe I could find myself again. One afternoon, my daughter suggested we go for a walk in the park. At first, I resisted. I didn't want to face the world. But she insisted, and so I went. The sun was warm on my skin, the trees rustled gently in the breeze, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of peace. "Mom," she said as we sat on a bench, "you gave 32 years to someone who didn't value it. But that doesn't mean those years were wasted. You raised us, you built a home, you gave love. That's who you are. Not his betrayal." Her words sank deep into me. For so long, I had measured my worth by his presence. But maybe my worth was something he could never take away. That night, I wrote a new promise in my journal. I will not let betrayal define me. I will find myself again. It wouldn't be easy. Healing never is. But for the first time since that fateful sentence at my son's wedding, I believed it was possible. The applause that had filled the room when my son and his bride entered was still echoing in my ears. But inside me, there was only silence. The kind of silence that presses against your chest, heavy and suffocating. I sat there with a frozen smile, clapping for the couple who deserved every ounce of joy, yet feeling like the floor had been pulled out from under me. 32 years of loyalty, erased in seconds by one sentence. I had replayed his words again and again in my mind, each time wondering if I had misheard, if perhaps he had been joking, or if there had been some miscommunication. But no, his voice had been steady, his eyes cold, his tone deliberate. He had meant every word. And that truth, sharper than any blade, cut into me until I felt hollow. People always talk about heartbreak as if it's a single moment, one shattering instant where everything breaks apart. But in reality, heartbreak lingers. It's not the blow itself, it's the echo that stays with you. It's the way the mind refuses to accept what it already knows, the way the heart stubbornly holds on even when it's been told to let go. That's what I was experiencing, an endless loop of disbelief, grief, and betrayal. I remember the first time he had said he loved me. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was quiet, in the middle of a grocery store aisle while we were choosing cereal. He had just looked at me and said it, like it was the simplest truth in the world. Back then, I thought love was exactly that. Simple, unshakable, permanent. But now, after 32 years, he had proven that love could be conditional, fragile, and cruelly withdrawn in the most public way possible. As the speeches continued, I couldn't help but think about how marriages aren't just built on romance. They're built on shared memories, compromises, unspoken understandings. They're built on the small things no one else notices. Who makes the coffee in the morning? Who folds the laundry just the way you like it? Who knows exactly how much silence you need after a bad day? 32 years of those small things have been wiped away in seconds, as though none of it had mattered. But here's the part that stung the most. I realized I wasn't mourning the loss of him. I was mourning the loss of who I thought he was. The man who held my hand through childbirth. The man who stayed up with me when our baby had a fever. The man who said he'd grow old with me. That man was gone long before the words were spoken at the wedding. I just hadn't noticed. And isn't that the cruelest thing? That betrayal doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It creeps in quietly, settling in the cracks of daily life until one day, it stands in front of you, bold and undeniable. Looking back, maybe there were signs. Maybe the distance that grew between us wasn't just life getting in the way. Maybe the sighs, the distractions, the late nights weren't innocent. But love makes you blind. Loyalty makes you deaf. You believe what you want to believe until you can't anymore. When the dance floor opened and laughter filled the air, I excused myself and stepped outside. The cool night air hit my face, sharp and refreshing. For the first time all evening, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. I looked up at the sky, searching for strength in the stars. I whispered to myself, "You are still standing." Because despite everything, despite the humiliation, the heartbreak, the loss, I was still here. In that quiet moment, I realized something powerful. What he had tried to erase wasn't gone. My 32 years weren't erased. My loyalty wasn't wasted. My love wasn't meaningless. Because all of it had shaped me. It had made me stronger, more resilient, more compassionate. His betrayal wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of his choices. And that's when it struck me. Sometimes life rips things away not to punish you, but to free you. Maybe his words weren't an ending. Maybe they were an opening. An invitation to reclaim the parts of myself I had buried under the weight of keeping a marriage alive. An invitation to start again, not as someone's wife, but as myself. So I stood there under the night sky, listening to the faint sounds of celebration drifting from inside, and I made myself a promise. A promise that his words would not define me, that I would not let betrayal harden my heart, that I would rise from this with dignity, with strength, and with a love for myself that no one could ever take away. Because sometimes, survival is not about holding on. Sometimes, it's about letting go. And in that moment, I knew I was ready to let go. The rest of the night passed in fragments, like a dream where you're half awake but not fully present. I returned to the hall, forced a smile, hugged my son tightly, and told him how proud I was. His eyes sparkled with happiness, and for that brief moment, the heaviness in my chest softened. Because no matter what had been taken from me, I still had him, and his joy was real, untouched by the storm raging in my heart. But once the celebrations ended and the hall emptied, I was left alone with the echo of that sentence. 32 years of loyalty, erased in seconds. The words haunted me. They were like a stain I couldn't scrub clean, no matter how hard I tried. Driving home, I stared blankly at the road, the lights blurring into streaks of gold and white. My mind was a battlefield, half of me replaying every memory, searching for answers, and the other half whispering, "It's over. Move on." At home, the silence was deafening. I walked through the rooms like a ghost, my eyes landing on the photographs we had framed over the years, family vacations, birthdays, anniversaries. In each one, I was smiling, holding on to a dream I thought would last forever. I wanted to tear them down, to erase the evidence of my own blindness. But instead, I just stood there, tears streaming down my face, realizing that those years had been real. The love I gave had been real. Nothing could erase that, not even his cruelty. That night, I barely slept. My pillow was wet with tears, my body exhausted, but my spirit restless. By dawn, I realized something. Grief doesn't mean you are weak. It means you care deeply. And if there's one thing I knew about myself, it was that my capacity to care, to love, to remain loyal, those were not weaknesses. They were my strength. The days that followed weren't easy. I had to explain to friends, to family, to myself what had happened. Each time I spoke of it, I felt the shame rise up again. But I reminded myself, shame belongs to the betrayer, not the betrayed. And slowly, I began to reclaim my voice. I started writing in a journal, pouring every thought, every ache, every flash of anger onto paper. With every word, I felt lighter. I began walking in the mornings, letting the sun touch my skin, breathing in fresh air, reminding myself that the world was still beautiful. And in those quiet moments, I realized I was rediscovering who I was outside of being his wife. I was a mother, a friend, a woman with dreams I had set aside for far too long. I was someone who still had life to live, laughter to share, and love to give. His betrayal didn't erase that. It only forced me to confront it. And slowly, day by day, I learned to forgive, not him, but myself. I forgave myself for not seeing the signs, for holding on too long, for believing in a man who did not deserve my loyalty. Forgiving myself was the hardest part, but it was also the most freeing. Now, as I tell you this story, I want you to remember something. No betrayal, no sentence, no person has the power to erase your worth. People may walk away, they may betray, they may choose cruelty over kindness, but that does not define you. Your strength, your love, your resilience, that's what defines you. 32 years of loyalty did not vanish in one sentence. They live in me. They live in the way I raised my son, in the way I gave love wholeheartedly, in the way I still rise after being broken. And if you are listening to this, and you have ever been betrayed, abandoned, or hurt by someone you trusted, I want you to know this: you are not alone. You are not less. You are not erased. Pain is real. Heartbreak is real. But so is healing. And healing begins the moment you decide to believe that you are more than what happened to you. So here I am, not as a victim, not as a discarded wife, but as a survivor. As a woman who loved fiercely, who was betrayed deeply, and who now stands taller than ever. His words may have tried to erase me, but in truth, they set me free. And to anyone out there holding on to pain, let me say this: don't let one person's cruelty steal your hope. Don't let betrayal make you hard. Choose to rise. Choose to love again. Choose to believe that your story isn't over. Because sometimes the ending we never wanted becomes the beginning we desperately needed.